Okay, so Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I have a lot of thoughts about this movie. I'm going to try to keep them as compressed and as quick and as fluent as I can manage. There's no script or outline for this review. It's just sort of my thoughts after having seen the film last night. I've had about uh, 16, 17 hours to sort of digest my thoughts on the picture. Um, right off the bat, I really liked the movie. I think it was really fun. I thought it was a lot of good character elements, a lot of good characterization. It felt like a breath of fresh air, to be honest, because we haven't seen a Marvel movie anything like this before, and after 12 years or whatever of this, or 13 years or whatever it was, um, one begins to tire of the same patterns and formats every time. Because as fun and as interesting as the Marvel films can be, and often are, at the same time, they're also very formulaic and they're very editorialized by the studio, and so everything sort of follows the same structure and has similar types of characters and has very similar development and jokes here and story here, and it follows like a pattern almost. And that was not present here. I think this was the most different Marvel Cinematic Universe movie I've seen, which is a great thing. It's a really good thing. It's in a lot of ways it's what Doctor Strange should have been. This sort of really leans into the otherworldness, leans into the mysticism and the completely like different world of of magic and of martial arts, which is what Doctor Strange should have done with magic. Um, whereas I suppose movies like Thor and Doctor Strange served as a sort of like a soft intro to mysticism in the Marvel universe. Thor being very soft because it's basically they treat it like science. Um, Whereas Doctor Strange starts to lean in there a little bit further. I think this film is the culmination of that. I think this is the most like comic booky movie I've seen in a while. This is the most comic book movie. Yeah, that's the best way to say it. I've seen in some time. Um, it reminded me of the What If episode 4 with Doctor Strange, actually, which is my favorite episode of What If thus far, because it's just so comic booky and like otherworldly and mysticism-y. Uh, if I can invent words here, it really was a breath of fresh air. The choreography was brilliant. It's what Iron Fist should have been as far as the choreography goes. The bus scene, I think, is probably my favorite fight scene in the movie. It's the most real and grounded of the fight scenes. Now, I'm not a martial arts expert by any stretch, but in the comics, Shang-Chi utilizes kung fu, and I don't think that's the case in this movie. I'd imagine it's more of a mixed martial arts sort of situation. I don't know any much about martial arts at all, but it doesn't look kung fu-y to me. It looks more I don't know, practical. But no offense to anybody who studies kung fu, but yeah, the choreography, the fighting is just fucking excellent. The whole movie. There's a lot of fun cameos. I think there's too much setting up for other movies. I think with Shang-Chi, it should more or less be its own thing. You shouldn't have to tie it back to the rest of the Marvel Universe all the time. And they do a pretty good job of that. The only thing I would have liked to see is a little bit more injection of Iron Man, because it uses an Iron Man villain as the primary antagonist of the film, which I'd like to which I will get into. I thought the acting across the board was pretty good, with the exception of the actress who played Katie. And I'm not sure what her name is, to be honest, but the young man who plays Shang-Chi is excellent. I think he has a really bright future as far as acting goes. I believe he's a Canadian actor. I believe he's from Kim's Convenience, which is a fun show. I haven't watched a lot of it, but it's certainly an enjoyable show. And he's really charming. He's really cool. He's kind of like not Tony Stark or anything, but he's got a lot of charisma that reminds one of Tony Stark, and the sort of his childish, fun-loving nature is not unlike Tony Stark. But they're not, obviously they're polar opposite characters in a lot of ways. But that charisma just brought it reminds me of Robert Downey Jr. in some ways. That presence he has, that charm he has, I suppose. So as far as the villain goes, I thought he was really well written. I thought he was a good villain. It's just like he was very complex, and even if his motivations were simple, his character was complex and nuanced. It's just that. So I'm a big Iron Man fan, right? I don't know if you can tell. I have read a lot of Iron Man. I have a considerable portion of Iron Man's series. I've got most Iron Man comics from the late 70s all the way on to the mid 90s, with some gaps, but I've got most of them. And so I've read a shit ton of Iron Man, and so I kind of have a reverence for the Mandarin and characters like that. And the character we get in the movie is not the Mandarin, at all. And I know Marvel doesn't own Fu Manchu anymore, who is the character that the Mandarin is supposed to be in this film. So in the comics, Shang-Chi is the son of Fu Manchu, who is a sort of Chinese doctoral villain. He's an evil genius and businessman, and Shang-Chi is his son. And so the character, the Mandarin in this film, for all intents and purposes, is Fu Manchu, but they can't use Fu Manchu. And so we get this weird character who's neither Fu Manchu or the Mandarin, and he's this. In my opinion, they should have not done the Mandarin thing, because he's not the Mandarin. He has the 10 rings, but the 10 rings are nothing. In the comics, the 10 rings are not unlike the Infinite Gauntlet, in where they make you a god, and they call the Mandarin a god in this movie. He's not. Any given Avenger could probably kick his ass pretty handily. The 10 rings in this movie are really, really boring. They kind of just shoot and whip. They whip things, which is fucking lame. Whereas in the comics, the 10 rings are elements of nature. There's light and shadow and fire and wind and all this kind of stuff that the 10 rings are capable of manipulating, which make the Mandarin nigh unstoppable. And they come from Fin Fang Foom's race of aliens, and I forget what they're called. But I was also disappointed that Fin Fang Foom was not in this film. We do get dragons, and they are kind of connected to the rings in that they use the rings to sort of manipulate the Mandarin. At least that's how it seemed. And they don't use Fin Fang Foom. And it's what? I was so sure that Fin Fang Foom was going to be in this film, and he wasn't. And who Fin Fang Foom is he's he's from a hyper advanced, really intelligent race of dragon people, and he's this big green dragon, and he fights Iron Man, and he's awesome. And if you're familiar with Marvel mythology, you're probably familiar with Fin Fang Foom, whose race created the 10 rings. But it's too bad. I think the 10 rings look cool in this movie, but they're just they're not the 10 rings. They're just not at all. So it's I don't know. It's It's weird. I like what they did with everything. I just wish if they were gonna do the Mandarin, you just do the Mandarin because they did this in Iron Man 3, right? And it pissed people off, and so they do it again, more or less, where they give us or they tease us with the Mandarin, and then they don't really give us the Mandarin, and people were pissed off, and they even teased Fin Fang Foom with like Aldrich Killian's tattoos and stuff. And then again they do this in this film where they tell us it's the Mandarin, but then it's just not at all. And I made this sort of funny picture, which is probably the thumbnail for this video, where I said he looks like a disgruntled businessman on his commute to work. So that's the thumbnail of this video. But yeah, it's just they didn't even try to make the Mandarin anything like he is in the comics. And you can adapt things, you can change things, but when your character becomes completely unrecognizable as what they're supposed to be, you might as well just make a new character. Like, I don't think there's a lot of people who bought tickets to this movie because they thought the Mandarin was going to be in it, right? Like, it's not like most people are sold on a movie based off some obscure Iron Man villain who hasn't been around in the comics for some time. But those are really my only criticisms. Are the actress who played Katie. She was like kind of like sitcom-y acting, so she wasn't very good. I thought her character was funny. It's just that her acting was not very good. And obviously she's going to be in more films later on, so I hope that she gets better in between. I hope she grows into the role, but not very good in this movie, her acting. And the Mandarin thing kind of pissed me off, and the lack of Fin Fang Foom was disappointing. But those are my only real criticisms. That and the fact that they try way too hard to integrate Shang-Chi into the Marvel Universe at the end. But the thing is, like, he doesn't really fit. He's not really on the same level as like Thor or anybody, or Spider-Man or Hulk. In this, that is the weird thing as well. Is in this film, one more criticism I have. I like the movie a lot. Like, I really enjoyed it. Just to be clear. But Shang-Chi kind of has like a Deus Ex Machina situation where he just gets like more and more powers inexplicably as the film goes on, and there's not like really satisfactory explanation for any of it. There's a lot of like metaphor, but there's not any like. Okay, so Shang-Chi can like control the Dragon Guardian, like he's riding around on the Dragon Guardian and like telling it what to do and shit at the end of the film. Which, by the way, I think is awesome that they go to another dimension. I think that's really cool. I think that the whole like mystical creatures and stuff for mythology, like actual mythology, mythological beasts, in this realm, I think that's really cool. Like a lot of creatures you would see in like old Chinese like imagery and paintings and carvings and stuff. I thought that was awesome. But as far as Shang-Chi goes, he starts out as like just a really good fighter, which is fine. That's why you're interested in him, because he's like the master of martial arts. He's like the world's greatest fighter or whatever. And then as the movie goes, he just sort of gets more and more powers and shit. Like he just sort of learns in about two minutes of screen time his mother's like powers and moveset and stuff. And I get that he learned it a little bit when he was a kid, but not actually. So that comes out of nowhere. I mean, they try to set up a little bit, but more or less it comes out of nowhere. And then also Shang-Chi can like breathe underwater, and he can like control dragons and shit. And he also has mastery inexplicably over the 10 rings. all of a sudden at the end of the film, which is peculiar. But I mean, I get they had to give him something, I guess, because it seems to me like they want him to be an Avenger, um, later on, which is just like so far outside what Shang-Chi is supposed to. Like, Shang-Chi doesn't give a shit about any of that stuff. Like, he's not interested in being an Avenger. He's doing his own thing. He's got his own corner of the Marvel Universe he hangs out with like Iron Fist and characters like that, where he's like interested in martial arts and mysticism and shit. He's not concerned with fighting like giant robots or Thanos or anything like that. That's not who Shang-Chi is. Um, but like whatever, it's every character has to be the biggest thing ever now. Nobody can just be in their own little corner. Everybody has to be like saving the fucking universe with the Avengers and whatnot. It's like, okay, well, it's like it started the Marvel, and this is a problem I kind of have with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where the Marvel Cinematic Universe started with the cast of Avengers, so it makes sense that all of the characters with independent films would eventually end up together in one film, because they're all like members of the Avengers. They're all like founding Avengers, so that makes sense. But then you have a situation where you have the Guardians of the Galaxy and Shang-Chi and people like this who should be off in their own corners doing their own things with their own cast of characters, who are now forced to mingle with the Avengers, but these are characters that should not interface too often. Shang-Chi is somebody who should be hanging out with like Spider-Man for the occasional team up, or Daredevil or Iron Fist or somebody like that. But Shang-Chi doesn't have a place on the Avengers. It's not his world. He's not interested in that. It's like it's not anyway. I mean, everybody's a fucking Avenger at this point, but that's largely an MCU problem. That's largely the MCU's fault. But anyway, I like the film quite a lot. I'm definitely going to be getting it on Blu-ray when that comes out. What else? Is there anything else? The costume design is really good. I really like that. I would like to see Shang-Chi kind of go more street level, though. Go back to his roots, his comic book origins. And to be fair, Shang-Chi hasn't had like an ongoing series in like 40 years, but at the same time, he's that character who kind of pops in occasionally, and that's what he should be. He should be more this street level guy. They kind of make him overpowered really quickly for no reason. But like at the beginning of the film, he's Shang-Chi, like comic book Shang-Chi, where he's like master of martial arts. And then by the end of the film, he's like riding dragons and like he's got superpowers and whatnot. And that's kind of ridiculous. It's like, it's out of nowhere. It really is. But I don't know. I guess they have to make, because they're not interested in telling independent stories. They're interested in telling an Avengers story all the time. They have to sort of take these characters that would not normally be Avengers level characters, and they're forcing them into these roles so that everybody is an Avenger. And that's too bad. And I hope they don't do that to Daredevil when they bring him back. I'd like to see Daredevil hang out with like Spider-Man and shit, not fight Ultron. And I know that Daredevil has fought Ultron in the comics, but he's largely interested in like one city, which is I think where the best Daredevil stories are told, where New York is as much of a character as Daredevil, and he's not sort of off fighting like cosmic beings and saving the world and shit. He's just being a person in a world amongst gods and monsters and these things. And that's where Shang-Chi belongs. That's where he operates as well. And Spider-Man is their sort of link to this greater world, where Spider-Man is a versatile enough character, whereas he is primarily interested in protecting his city and the people around him, but he's qualified to enter this bigger role when it's needed. Spider-Man is skilled and powerful and smart enough to go from street level to world saving, like Fantastic Four, cosmic level um, superhero when he needs to be, but he's more comfortable in his native element, which is largely street levels business. Um, so he's the sort of the in between the gods and monsters and the thugs and kingpins. He can play both roles. But Daredevil and Shang-Chi, and by the way, I love these characters like Iron Fist and Daredevil. Daredevil in particular is one of my favorite characters ever. But he belongs in the street level stories with the occasional, the occasional brush with the bigger elements. But anyway, those are my thoughts and philosophies on the movies and the characters and how they fit into the universe and how I feel about Shang-Chi. But I'm excited to see where the character goes in the future. I hope they don't do like the cosmic level bullshit fighting Thanos and whatnot with Shang-Chi. But I would like to see him again, and I think that he works best as the master of martial arts rather than this like super powered mega god or whatever the hell he is at the end of the film. But yeah, it's a really good film. Go and see it. It's solid stuff. My concern is that it won't do very well compared to a lot of other Marvel films, simply because of the pandemic and the fact that a lot of people are either not able to go to the theaters or not comfortable with going to the theaters, which is why Black Widow was sent to streaming and why it didn't do super well. But I want this film to do really well, because I want Marvel to feel encouraged and comfortable to do these kinds of stories in the future. I don't think everything has to be an Avengers movie, even though Shang-Chi kind of becomes an Avengers movie at the end, unfortunately, which is too bad. But I'd like to see more movies along the lines of Shang-Chi, and I'd like to see more mystical elements in the Marvel universe. But those are my very rambly, disconnected thoughts on the movie. I hope they were bearable to listen to. I know I went over the same things a few times in certain places, but nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed. I hope I was somewhat coherent, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.